In my previous video demo, I demonstrated creating a new pluggable database called PDBAPPTST and a custom service name called my new test PDB for that. You can look at the previous video or even my blog post for the commands. So you can have multiple services coexisting inside a database. So for example, for PDB1 I have a service called my PDB running on both instance 1 and instance 2, which I've just recreated today 16 July. But for PDB1 I also have a default service called PDB1 running at both instances. The Oracle recommendation is to not use the default service name that comes with a pluggable database. So for this pluggable database there is also a default service name, but the best method is for each PDB you create a custom service. So for PDAPPTST I had created a custom service called new test PDB. For PDB1 I have just recreated a custom service called my PDB. Now you can also have multiple services for the same pluggable database. This is one view where you can see the services running from $$ service. You can also select from CDB services. I'll just exclude the default ones that are for CDB or root. Okay. So for PDB1 there is a default called PDB1 and there is a custom service called my PDB. Similarly for PDBAPPTST there is a default service called PDBAPPTST and a custom service. If you recall from the previous video I had given you the command using srvctl add service. Now the point of this video is you can actually have multiple services for the same pluggable database. Suppose your pluggable database supports finance, HR, supply chain. So instead of having one service name you can have three service names: finance, HR and supply chain. And if you want the supply chain application to not be able to connect to the common database, you just shut down that one service. As long as the supply chain application team cannot change the connect string to use a different service name, they will not be able to connect, because whenever they try to connect to the service name called supply chain they will fail because the service has been shut down. So for example here I can show you. So remember this command will only show you the custom services that you have created, not the default. So the default services PDB1 and PDAPPTST are not shown, nor are the services for CDB root. So srvctl status will show you all the custom services, and it shows me that I have two services running, and I can also check the status of those, the configuration of those services. So if I look for my PDB, it's allowed to run at both instances, which you can see here. So cardinality 2, it's running on a primary database. This is all about the failover and load balancing, which we will not go into, but this service is tied to this pluggable database. If I were to check for the other custom service, so new test PDB is similarly configured, but it is configured to PDBAPPTST, while my PDB is configured to PDB1 only. I can go on and add custom services. So suppose for example, okay, how are these services viewed? When you from the client side, assuming you are using a TNS Zora, but basically if you are using a JDB connect string it will be just the same, it's formatted differently. But for a TNSM Zora this is how you see the service. My PDB points to my PDB. This does not identify your pluggable database name. Like I just showed you above, service my PDB is for pluggable database called PDB1, which you can see from here also, while service new test PDB is for pluggable database called PDAPPTST. So here in this TNS strings you will never know which PDB it is connecting to. So that is the advantage of pluggable databases. Now I'm going to add some more PDBs, some more services for this PDB, PRDB APPTST. And here I'm going to say it is preferred to run only on one node. Okay, so I will configure, say when it starts up it will start only on one node, but I can also say that it can fail over to another node if the first node or the first instance goes down. So preferred specifies the primary node, and I can just define another node for it as a failover node, which is called available. So if RACDB1 goes down, the available instance RACDB2 will be used for this service. Then of course I can just specify other parameters. Now in this case the failover policy really is between one instance and the other instance, so I have just minus tafpolicy. So I'm configuring basic failover for select statements only. If I had multiple instances, I could have configured collection load balancing goal. So this would be the parameter for connection load balancing, and I'm tying this to PDB minus PDB. So I've created a new service, but it's running only on RACDB1 with failover to RACDB2, and the service name is PDAPPTST. Now this service can still be configured for the scan address. Let me just PDAPPTST. So let's just go here. In this configuration I do not specify which instance it connects to. I do not specify which pluggable database it connects to. Let's just check the status of the service. Okay, it's not running, that's fine. So I will start up the service. And let's see the status of the service again. So it's running only on RACDB1. If I look for all the custom services, I can run this command. So this command, without specifying a service name, will show me all custom services. So my PDB is running on these two. New test PDB is running on both instances, but PDAPPTST is only on RACDB1. And it's connecting to PDB/PTST because that is what I've configured it to connect to. I've added the service to PDB/PTST. Sorry. And it's running on RACDB1. If I were to connect again, make a new connection, it's always running on RACDB1 only. Just for demonstration purpose, I'll show you the other service. So the other service I had defined is called new test PDB. First time I connected to RACDB 1. If I were to reconnect, now it got connected to RACDB 2. So because I have defined this service here to run only on RACDB 1 as the preferred and RACDB 2 as the failover instance, whenever any client connects to a service called PDBAPPTST, it will always connect to RACDB 1 only. Okay, and if RACDB 1 is down, the service will be available on RACDB 2. Why would you want a service running only on one instance if you have a cluster? You want to reduce the cache fusion overheads. Basically, let's say you have a lot of DML running for that application, and the same blocks are being updated from both the instances of your cluster. Then every time a session in instance 1 needs a block that has been recently modified and is present in the buffer cache of instance 2, it will make a request, and that buffer has to transfer over the interconnect to instance 1. Then let's say a session on instance 2 requests the same buffer again. It will again transfer over the interconnect to instance 2. So the busy blocks will keep getting transferred between the two instances, between the two nodes over the interconnect. So that's a significant overhead in a RAC environment. If you have such an application where you have a lot of busy blocks and you don't want to suffer the overhead of the blocks being transferred between the two nodes frequently because the same blocks are being updated, then you tie that service to only one instance. But you still make the advantage of RAC, saying if the instance goes down, the service, if the instance goes down here, the service will fail over to the other instance. So in normal simple applications, you want instances running on the service running on both instances, like these two applications running on both instances. But the application that is going to use this service will run only on one instance at a time. So you are reducing the inter-instance contention for applications that run on this service. You can still use the srvctl relocate command to relocate the service from RACDB 1 to RACDB 2 as an administrative command. If say the node that is running RACDB 1 itself is busy in terms of CPU overhead, so you have to move all the traffic over to RACDB 2, you can do a relocate of that service to RACDB 2. But otherwise you can keep the service dedicated to running on RACDB 1, and then you could just do something similar. Let's say I want to create another service which will run only on RACDB 2 as the preferred instance and RACDB 1 as the alternate instance in case of failover. And it's still the same pluggable database. I don't have a third pluggable database, that's fine. And then I just start this service. Let me just edit the client side, assuming that I'm running on a client. Just edit the client side TNS Zora. These are all different tests which I've been running, so you'll see many entries here, in my TNS Zora. So again, your TNS Zora, your JDBC connect string does not identify which instance, it just still goes to the scan. But because now your scan knows that this service is running only on node 2 and your scan knows that this service is running only on node 1, it will always go to RACDB 1. Any connection to this service will always go to RACDB 2. Any connection to this service will always go to RACDB 1. So let's test it out. Okay, so now this service is running on RACDB2. I'll just connect again. And it's still running on RACDB2 only. Connect a third time. Still running on RACDB2. Let me connect to the other service. So this service PDAPPTST1 is connecting to RACDB1 only. So this is always connecting to RACDB1. But if I were to connect any of the other services that are configured to run on both instances, let's see for this one. Let me reconnect again. So here scan is redirecting me to any of the two instances. I'll try the other service name called where is it? Test PDB1. Okay, connected to RAC PDB1. And now it connected to RACDB PDB. So that is how you can configure services to connect to specific PDBs. You can configure services to run only on specific instances. So my PDB is running on both instances. New test PDB is running on both instances. But PDBAPPTST1 is running only in one instance. PDAPPTST2 is running only on the other instance. If I look at the configuration of say my new test PDB is configured to run only on PDB to this pluggable database. While my PDB is configured to run to this pluggable database, and this will run on both instances as preferred. Similarly, new test PDB runs on both instances as preferred. But if I were to check any of the new services that I created, PDBAPPTST1 is connected to this PDB, but it will only run on this instance as the preferred, and if this instance goes down, it will fail over to the other instance. Similarly, APPTST2 configured to connect to same pluggable database, but RACDB2 as the preferred instance and RACDB1 as a failover instance. So remember, you can always configure services like this. This is the command. I configured PDBAPPTST2 in my container database RACDB to connect to RACDB2 as the preferred instance, RACDB1 as the alternate instance for failover, and to connect only to pluggable database called PDBAPPTST.